This is Radio Caravan, the world news, read by Shabnam Modgil. Muslim pilgrims donning face masks and moving in small groups after days in isolation began arriving to Islam's holiest site in Mecca today for the start of a historically unique and scaled-down Hajj experience reshaped by the coronavirus pandemic. Rather than standing and praying shoulder to shoulder in a sea of people, pilgrims are social distancing, standing apart and moving in small groups of 20 to limit exposure and the potential transmission of the coronavirus. A recent report by President Trump's coronavirus task force determined nearly half of the states in the country have ongoing outbreaks severe enough to classify them as red zone jurisdictions. In this report, 21 states falling under that classification. U.S. deaths from the coronavirus approaching 150,000 today, the highest level in the world, and rising by 10,000 in 11 days. The coronavirus deaths have risen by nearly 1,300, the biggest one-day increase since May. California, Florida and Texas, the three most populous states, reporting one-day record spikes in deaths yesterday, together accounting for 584 of the 1,292 new deaths. Arkansas, Montana and Oregon also had one-day record increases in COVID-19 fatalities. As many would expect, the coronavirus pandemic has greatly affected the global tourism industry, according to the United Nations World Tourism Organization barometer, revealing that lockdowns have led to a 98% fall in international tourist numbers in May compared to 2019. And the CES, held every year in Las Vegas, attracting visitors from all across the world to witness next-generation technology innovations in cars and gadgets. The annual Global Cars and Gadget Fest Consumer Electronics Show will go fully digital this coming January. AMC Theatres and Comcast Corporation's Universal Pictures have agreed to a major shift that will allow the studio's movies to be made available to U.S. audiences at home after just 3 weekends in cinemas. The heads of 4 of the largest tech companies in the world are scheduled to sit before the House Judiciary Committee today for what is expected to be the blockbuster event of the summer. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, Apple CEO Tim Cook, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and Google parent Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai will be met with a barrage of questions from the 13 members of the subcommittee on antitrust, commercial and administrative law, ranging from their market power to the lengths they go to hold on to that power. Big tech will come under the glare of a national spotlight today as these 4 leaders face questions from members of Congress. And a seemingly obscure Capitol Hill press conference by a fringe group of self-proclaimed medical experts quickly became the most widely seen propaganda video about the coronavirus after Breitbart News live-streamed it on Facebook. The post racked up tens of millions of views across social media in a matter of hours, far surpassing the traffic of the infamous pandemic disinformation video. It grabbed the attention of President Trump and his son, Donald Trump Jr., who had his Twitter account partially suspended for sharing a link to the video. And the video, featuring a string of right-wing talking points that criticized lockdown measures, demonized public health officials, called for schools to reopen, and urged Americans not to wear face masks. The speakers, who were all portrayed as doctors, often declared hydroxychloroquine a cure for COVID-19. In an unprecedented escalation in social media, companies' efforts to police this false information, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube all removed the video on COVID-19 that President Trump had promoted. In an appearance before the House Judiciary Committee, Attorney General William Barr has said he doesn't believe that systemic racism policing exists in the United States, despite being presented with data suggesting that it does. Some come early and leave before the atmosphere turns and the trouble begins, but others sit out the peaceful demonstrations and arrive in time for the nightly showdown to the beat of drummers rallying Portland's ad hoc force of protesters against Trump's troops. Every evening follows the same broad ritual in downtown Portland in support of Black Lives Matter. And a Black Lives Matter mural painted outside of Trump Tower in Manhattan that has faced significant vandalism since it was unveiled earlier this month defaced for the 4th time last night. West Texas Republicans are looking forward to a visit from President Trump today. The election is just over 3 months away and the president is ratcheting up the tempo of his campaign and fundraising. He'll be in friendly Ector County, which gave him nearly 69% of its votes 4 years ago. Air Force One due at the airport in Midland, and then a drive down to downtown Odessa for a luncheon at the Marriott Hotel. And former Vice President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, and his campaign team are playing it cool for now, even as many Democrats are calling for bolstered efforts to potentially win in Georgia and Texas. He's just days away from choosing his running mate. and was uncharacteristically tight-lipped about the final stretch of his search. But the presumptive nominee seemed prepared to talk about at least one leading contender, California Senator Kamala Harris. More than 100 police agencies are withdrawing from agreements to send personnel to bolster security at next month's Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee. And dozens of artists have put their signatures to an open letter from the Artist Rights Alliance addressed to the Democratic and Republican and National, Congressional and Senatorial committees, asking all parties to put an end to appropriating popular songs for political purposes without authorization. John Lewis will lie in repose at the Georgia Capitol in his hometown of Atlanta in one of the last memorial services for the late Democratic congressman before he's buried. Members of the public will be able to pay their respects to him today at the state capitol rotunda following a ceremony in his honor, and then a private burial service in Atlanta is scheduled for tomorrow. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard launched underground ballistic missiles as part of an exercise involving a fake aircraft carrier in the Strait of Hormuz, the latest barrage in a drill that saw 2 American bases temporarily go on alert over those launches. Sudan's Prime Minister met with Egypt's intelligence chief in the Sudanese capital as tensions rise over a colossal hydroelectric dam being built on the Blue Nile. And the joint UN-African Union mission in Sudan's war-torn Darfur region urged the government to deploy troops there as soon as possible following a wave of deadly attacks on civilians. Yemen's leading separatist group will abandon its aspirations for self-rule to implement a stalled peace deal brokered by Saudi Arabia. Record high temperatures will continue to be challenged across the Middle East this week as blistering heat and dry conditions remain over the region. And hundreds of people protested outside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's official residence in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, pressing forward with a more than month-long campaign calling on the long-time leader to step down. And residents of the city of Tel Aviv woke up this morning to a jarring sight, a pop-up exhibit depicting a life-size statue of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu enjoying a lavish meal by himself at a sprawling table in a mock reenactment of the Last Supper. Work has begun to assemble giant components to build an experimental nuclear fusion reactor in France that is expected to start up in 2035 and deliver energy in a process inspired by the sun. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. Heathrow Airport, Europe's busiest airport, called on Britain to urgently introduce a passenger testing regime, warning that without one it would lose a game of global quarantine roulette. Following the announcement that North Korea is investigating its first possible coronavirus case, authorities reminded foreigners living in Pyongyang to abide by anti-coronavirus measures. And a pair of new statues in South Korea of a man kneeling in front of a girl symbolizing a victim of sexual slavery by Japan's wartime military is the latest subject of diplomatic sensitivity between the countries, with Tokyo's government spokesperson questioning whether the male figure represents the Japanese Prime Minister. Americans won't be the only voters going to the polls in November. Myanmar's third national election since transitioning from half a century of military rule is slated for the 8th of November. And Hong Kong's hospital system could face collapse as it grapples with a sharp rise in coronavirus cases, according to the city's leader, Carrie Lam. New virus clusters that were identified in the port city of Dalian are now spreading to other provinces in China. And the United States and close ally Australia held high-level talks on China and agreed on the need to uphold a rules-based global order. But the Australian foreign minister stressed Canberra's relationship with Beijing was important and it had no intention of hurting it. More than 38,000 Indians became Australian citizens in 2019-20, a 60% increase from the previous year. An iconic Indian football club, Mohun Bagan, went global today as it became the country's first ever sports entity to feature on NASDAQ billboards in New York's Times Square. Ratan Tata, the chairman emeritus of Tata Group of Companies, recently took to Instagram to share a nostalgic post on the 116th birth anniversary of J.R.D. Tata. And nearly 23 years after Sukhoi aircrafts were imported, a fleet of 5 French-manufactured Rafale multi-role combat jets have touched down in India. And these tore into the skies this morning after a 7,000-kilometer flight from France, which included an overnight pit stop in the UAE and mid-air refueling. Total number of COVID-19 cases in India is now at 15.31 lakhs. And the flood situation in Bihar has taken a turn for the worse, with 2.4 million people now affected by floods triggered by heavy rainfall. And the monsoon session of the Maharashtra legislature has been postponed once again for more than a month. And 3 people lost their lives as the second straight day of moderate to heavy rain turned many roads in Karachi into rivers. We do have fresh medical report of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif filed with the Lahore High Court's Registrar Office, showing that he must undergo coronary catheterization as a significant part of his heart is at risk. And as the verification of dubious pilot licenses is under pressure, the Aviation Division has constituted a 5-member committee to investigate the cases of 194 suspended pilots. The independent adjudicator of the Pakistan Cricket Board today announced its decision on a disciplinary case involving middle-order batsman Umar Akmal and reduced his 3-year ban to 18 months. And that's all I have in the news for you today.